every marketing leader has to be thinking about the journey of their scale up as multiple ceilings. Every tactic, every channel, every platform that we invest in at some point has a ceiling. I fully, wholeheartedly believe that if you do not invest in brand, you pay the price in customer acquisition cost every quarter from now until you exit. When you go through the process of scaling through 50 million, 75 million, 100 million ARR and plus, if you've been in a very tightly defined niche, the danger is that some of your new customers in the future might look different to some of the customers you've been in. The biggest fear of any marketer should be becoming separate, divorced from their customer. And I really believe that helpfulness is a great path to a strong brand.
What keeps the chief marketing officer of a unicorn awake at night? Spoiler alert, it's how to be closer to customers. This week, we're talking with Andrew Davies, the CMO of Paddle, a unicorn valued at more than $1.4 billion. Together, we explore what the role of marketing is in a fast-growing tech company. Andrew will explain why being the most helpful brand in SaaS is key to Paddle's explosive growth. By the way, this podcast is sponsored by our own ScaleUp for scaleups. More on that later.
So you said once that one of the things that keeps you up at night as a CMO of a scale-up is the fear of the next ceiling, what comes next. So what is your current fear?
So if we dig into that statement, I think every marketing leader has to be thinking about the journey of their scale up as multiple ceilings. Every tactic, every channel, every platform that we invest in at some point has a ceiling. And so, I do believe we've always got to be innovating and investing ahead of time to make sure we uncover those next areas of growth, so that when we hit a ceiling in our current channel, we have somewhere else to go. So I think that's really important. And so, I also believe that we've always got to be operating on two timeframes. This quarter's demand is very important, but also where we're positioned in a wider market in 2 or 3 years' time. And so, yes, I want to make sure that we're not a company that's constrained in its current growth motions and growth loops, but we're investing to make sure we've got a position in the market in a few years to come.
Is there something specific you're currently afraid of?
So I think when it comes to the marketing process program at Paddle, my concern as we scale is that we find new markets outside of our really tight ideal customer profile in time to understand them deeply, get to know them intimately so that we can scale into them successfully. And so that is always a concern for me. I think the biggest fear of any marketer should be becoming separate, divorced from their customer.
Yeah.
And when you go through the process of scaling through 50 million, 75 million, 100 million ARR and plus, if you've been in a very tightly defined niche, the danger is that some of your new customers in the future might look different to some of the customers you've been in because you've defined a beachhead, as Jeffrey Moore in his book Crossing the Chasm talks about, and you haven't found that next market. And so, yeah, that's something that keeps me up at night, that we find new pockets of volume that we can help serve in the future. And it's been, 2024 has brought a few of those new customer types to us, which has been good, because that was definitely a fear of mine over the last couple of years at Paddle.
So what do you do in those kinds of situations? And what do you instruct your team to do?
I think you've got to test. I really believe there's that process of scattering before you gather, and you've got to make sure that you've got tests that are finding out where this demand might be, what are the types of companies that you might be able to serve in the future. And so very practically, to use some examples, we tried to go upmarket quite early a few years ago, and we found actually that the upmarket customers, larger customers, they have a very different pain set than the customers we serve right now that are mostly SMBs, product-led software companies around the globe. But we found a couple of other niches, particularly apps that are looking to monetize on the web, and gaming companies that we haven't served previously, but demand is walking in our front door from them because of market forces in their own industries. And so, yeah, those are some areas where we've been able to find new markets to serve as we scale.
Mm-hmm. So what are some points where you decide that these new customers that are coming in make sense for you? I actually, as that very specifically, like a few years before, I actually looked at Paddle as a way of monetizing courses, because I saw, oh, cool, like you can do everything that like Stripe can't, which is awesome. But when I looked at the website, there was no mention of like course and stuff like that.
Yep.
But a friend of mine like worked on something very similar. So he said like, no, Paddle's awesome. Like you should, here's my rep, like talk to them. So how do you like deal with these customers like myself who might be SMBs, not enterprise or whatever,
Yeah.
who like you might get the volume in time, but like how do you decide, okay, to really go that way or not?
So that's actually a different issue for us. Because we solve tax compliance globally, sales tax compliance globally for all of our customers, as well as currency issues, subscription, et cetera, we had to be very specific on the vertical we served, which we defined as software. Tax rates are different for every type of service globally, and so it becomes infinitely more complex if we start serving what would be classed as human services, live consulting. So that was an issue we faced early on, where we had to be very careful to be restrictive over the services we served. Now we are becoming much more open to tangential industries, and so yes. we are able to serve. But that was the issue there. That wasn't a size issue; that was a sector issue, and we have to be better at communicating that, because some people got confused about that. Maybe you did too, and we weren't good at communicating the restrictions we were placing. And I think that is just a marketing lesson, isn't it? That people want to know the why. And but in terms of SMBs, right now we're running what we call the AI Launchpad, which is for pre-revenue companies. We now have 148 entrepreneurs on a remote Launchpad accelerator program, discounts from partners, funding available, cash prizes available, no fee, no application, no equity, just to try and gather more early companies before they even transact. We really do believe in serving very small businesses.
Because then again, you can get them very early and also understand them better.
Totally.
So AI obviously is something where the market is changing. In a recent keynote at Pennsylvania and Romania, you mentioned that there are like several market challenges for you. How would you explain, like, what are some of the key indicators that would suggest that the market is struggling, and how is Paddle navigating that situation? How are you navigating, and what would you suggest to other scale-up marketing leaders?
So we have a really unique view on the challenges and opportunities in the market. Outside of Paddle, which processes about $1 billion a year for 3,500 customers, we've also got a metrics product that's free. You can plug in any billing platform to it. And we see about 19,000 different subscription companies, about 36 billion of ARR. So it's a really interesting heartbeat of the software subscription industry. So we've seen a few things. Firstly, we've seen the incredible growth that came pre and then through COVID, a lot driven by what we know as ZIRP, zero interest rate phenomena. And then we saw the turn, and we see in our graphs the shocks that came in as the Russia-Ukraine crisis emerged. We see the SVB bank collapse. We see all of those things in those numbers. And we're analyzing not just new MRR there, but also churned MRR, downgrades, upgrades. We're looking at all of those numbers to try and understand what's going on. And many people have talked at length about the bigger, wider macro challenges, but really they come down to interest rates, meaning there's not as much capital in the system. People are spending that capital on growth, and we serve companies that are growing. We love companies that are growing, and so that is one challenge. And those companies do not have as much to spend on sales and marketing. And secondly, through similar macroeconomic issues, companies have less money to buy, and services are they either downgrade or they churn. And so in our base, again, 3,500 customers that we're supporting, we saw churn of not really of companies using us, but of their customers churning from them or pausing or downgrading. And that started to turn now into 2024. We've started to see some good signs, but really the hardships are net new ARR, net new MRR was very difficult to come by and still is very difficult to come by. And we saw really 3 major churn events where firstly, around the cycle of redoing yearly budgets in November, December, and then the SVB issue, and then the summer after that, where there was a lot of churn in B2B SaaS. And so people were losing subscription revenue that they were counting on because there was very big scrutiny by the CFO of making sure you could clean your book of SaaS products you were using. But now we are starting to see that turn.
Well, as a CMO, you obviously need to be very informed about the things that are going on around you. So how do you keep informed? I mean, you obviously have to follow geopolitical situation. COVID was a health crisis. Are those kind of things that keep you up at night as well? And were you able to predict some of these situations beforehand?
Yeah, I think prediction is a dangerous science.
Of course.
So we're looking for observation as much as possible. So, for example, through COVID, as the different markets around the world shut down and then opened, we could see that in our data. We could see which markets went remote very fast, remote services boomed, and things that were tied to a physical presence dropped. And we could see that happening all around. So it's more observation than prediction. But what we are seeing now, as we come into this new, this new year, we're now into the second quarter of it. It's racing past. There's a few things that are really interesting that I think bode well for the future. So I'll try not to predict.
Okay.
The first one is coming into January, we saw the first kind of month where growth had been driven by reactivation MRR. So that's people who had previously cancelled, now coming back and reactivating. And I think
Why?
they got the budget.
Yeah,
they
the new
suddenly got
budget.
exactly. Or they tried cheaper cost competitors.
Okay.
They'd failed and they were now coming back to their provider of choice. So that's really interesting to me. The other thing in the last month that we saw is suddenly there's been much less churn in April and May, which is really interesting. But that hasn't been overall churn. It's been downgrades that have been much less. So not full customer cancellations that have changed much, but many people are lowering their push on downgrades. And I think, again, that's a hat tip, a sign that there is less budgetary constraints at the businesses that are being served. And so both of those things, I think, bode very well that in time we will now see the ability for new ARR, new MRR as companies go and acquire new customers.
And do you see some other opportunities for the next 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, we see huge opportunities. So the problem with any market average is that it's wrong in most cases, right? I think the average age of people using diapers or nappies in the US is 23 because they're either very, very small or they're very, very old, right? So the average is a fallacy. I think that's the same. Things are not spread equally. And so where we see massive success, obviously, is in the Gen AI products, huge amount of growth, just products that people never knew they wanted now suddenly come into existence. That's really interesting. Secondly, internationalization. We're sitting here in Zagreb. Both of our companies serve companies all over the world. And having a global market, I think, is very resilient in a time of permacrisis. The old model was hire a bunch of sales reps and sell into the US and go up market, right?
Yeah.
Many of us built businesses in the past. I did, on exactly that model. I just don't think that works much anymore. And you need to diversify across all the markets across the globe. And our data says outside of the US, Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, APAC are growing faster. They might not be as big markets for many software products, but they're growing faster than the US and the UK. And so I think internationalization is another key area that you can focus on. And then the third one I'd point to is something that is such a truism. We can all nod our heads, but it's staying close to the customer. I think in this remote world, many people have become devoid of that customer insight. And now is the time. People want to be back in the room face to face. So customer visits. Have you hit all of your top 20 customers and taken them out for dinner or coffee? Do you know them? Have you talked about that conversation about their future face to face? Are you doing the same with your prospects? I think companies that are resilient to just a quick decision from a CFO are usually those that have got a deeper relationship with the company they're serving.
What do you think, so talking to customers, internationalization, what do you think are some other maybe scalable growth strategies that, again, marketing leaders or founders can think of as they scale their companies now in 2024 and going forward?
Yeah.
What would you recommend maybe to them?
So,
not to predict, but maybe.
Firstly, how long is a piece of string? The challenge here is that every company needs to define their go-to-market fit based on the company they serve, the customers they serve, and their product value proposition, and how that customer decides. You can think of a sales-led approach or a product-led approach or a marketing-led approach, and that can be dependent on your product and your customer, but it's also how that customer decides on your product type. You need to think carefully about that and understand that before you go all in on one of these go-to-market motions and read the frameworks and just rinse and repeat. But having said that, there are a few things I'm very bullish on and a few things I'm bearish on. I think outbound is becoming extremely hard. And so the world of scaling through an SDR or BDR motion, I think there's a very specific and important place for those teams in this market. But the way of scaling that by linearly hiring reps and seeing your revenue scale, I think that's very challenging in an AI-driven world where we're all getting so much outbound coming into our mailboxes. Things I'm positive on. I've always been positive on people buying from people. I go to conferences, I meet customers, I meet prospects regularly. And when I make an important buying decision, I usually want to understand who I'm buying from. I want to see the founder or meet the person who's in charge so I can have a relationship and a direct line if I need to, if anything goes wrong. And so, one of the most powerful mechanisms we're seeing across the companies we serve and in our own business is our executives becoming ever more connected into our industry, whether that's through social. We see, the rise of, audience building. We see the rise of influencer marketing, people buying from people rather than just from companies. I think that's something I'm very bullish on as well. And, we serve product-led businesses. Many of them have sales teams too. But one thing that I think is very important in a go-to-market motion is the ability for you to catch those fish before they grow, to catch those very small businesses, the ability to show value before other people do. In most sectors we serve, competition is up 3, 4, 5 times in terms of the number of companies that do something like you. So the ability for you to show value in that first interaction is critical. So people building freemium products or onboarding products or the ability to taste and see before you actually pay for something, I think is another critical strategy. So if you can combine those of building strong audience followership of your key executives and your key people in your company alongside something that's extremely easy to try and buy, often for free, I think those two things are very powerful in this market.
So you're basically a LinkedIn influencer now.
I think that's a description I hope I never have.
Just kidding. Well, we didn't explain this into many details. We mentioned some of the things, but maybe this is the right time for you to say what Paddle actually does. How does it help software as a service companies and other companies, as we heard?
Yeah, sure. So Paddle's mission is to help founders operate and grow their companies automatically. So what we want to do is take away a huge amount of the logistical, operational, risk, financial complexity of scaling a software company. I was a software founder before we got acquired, and I came and joined Paddle as CMO. And I always described the challenges that a founder faced that were non-customer or product related as champagne problems. The problems you have if something works. They're problems that are nice to have. And one of those champagne problems is, scaling globally with all the currency issues, all the back office problems over sales tax compliance, etc. And we take care of the payments infrastructure of the product-led businesses we serve so they can focus on the customer and the product. So your subscription management, all of the currencies you offer, the local price points that you offer, fraud prevention, chargebacks, refunds, as well as I said, sales tax, where we actually remit the right tax to every local authority globally, so you're compliant. Now, we also bought a company a couple of years ago called ProfitWell, which means we also offer this free metrics product that gives you a whole bunch of benchmarking data for free. A pricing team that's the world's best SaaS pricing consulting firm that see inside more pricing studies than anyone else in the world. And we can talk about some of the unique insight they have, which is really interesting. And a retention business called Retain, which helps you automatically remove churn through, whether it's voluntary churn or involuntary churn. And we can talk about that if it's interesting. So that's the blend of things we do, but all comes down to helping operate and grow automatically so you can focus back on your customers and your product.
Interesting.
Okay, so let's go into the acquisition since you
Sure.
So you've been part of a few acquisitions, obviously, both being acquired and acquiring, as you mentioned, ProfitWell. How do you look at acquisitions as a growth engine to a point? Like, how do acquisitions help a company grow, especially when you're a scale-up whale? When you can acquire companies. At the point when Paddle acquired ProfitWell, it was big news. It was probably one of the biggest stories in the tech media at that time, celebrated both in the SaaS circles. It made so much sense. Everyone was happy. Everyone was tweeting, including the founder influencer, Patrick Campbell. So how do you look at those kinds of acquisitions as something where it helps the company grow, when to do them and so on?
Yeah. So as you said, I sold my business. We then went and bought 5 businesses over 2 years as part of the Optimizely group, and then the ProfitWell one recently. And they all have a different reason, but they really cluster around, are we acquiring talent, a team? Are we acquiring tech, a capability? Or are we acquiring customers, a revenue base? And so those are the 3 main reasons. And so in several of the acquisitions I've been part of, it's been different versions of that. So, my company was acquired not for a big revenue base. We were quite small, about 60 staff, single digit ARR, millions of ARR. But we had a very unique capability, technology that could be applied to a much larger customer base of the acquirer. And we had a superb team. And that team had significant positions within that acquired entity once we were bought. Whereas there were other companies that we bought, like when that group went and bought Optimizely, a big US brand, it was because of the market knowledge, the market awareness, the brand that company had. And it was, I think, about 100 million of ARR, a lot of revenue. But uniquely, it had a very good acquisition model through its brand, but actually not so great retention metrics. And by combining a very strong retention metric within the core platform that purchased it and this very strong brand, you could bring the best of those two capabilities together. So, you always are looking for that 1 + 1 = 3, that synergy that's going to happen. But I think it is a very interesting strategy for scale-ups right now, particularly with the rise of the microtransaction, with the rise of, whether it's
Microacquisition.com, stuff like that.
exactly, yeah, all of these platforms where you can find solopreneurs, bootstrapped entrepreneurs, as well as some funded startups that are running out of runway. I mean, we see a lot of inbound, please can you rescue my company type interest. And I think that is a very interesting method of growth. Now, often in those cases, this isn't buying revenue or customers, but you could buy talent. And you can buy technology and capability. And I think both of those can be very compelling to move you forwards faster.
What's the biggest, as a marketing leader, how would you look at those acquisitions? So, for example, a scale-up decides, okay, we need to acquire a company for one of the reasons that you mentioned. I'm the marketing leader. How am I looking at this acquisition? What should I be aware of, look forward to, or be scared of?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, there's lots of things to look forward on. There's a few things to be scared of too. So we can get into that. And before we get into that, we can also think about acquisitions for marketing purposes.
Yeah.
We have this increased trend of people buying audiences, buying, media. And, part of the ProfitWell acquisition was knowing that they had a very strong media play, a big audience. That was part of the value of the acquisition. So I think there's a marketing kind of principle that's there, a marketing driver that's there too. But when you're thinking about an acquisition, let's talk about the negative stuff first. You've got to be very aware about how easy this is to integrate. So systems, GDPR compliance, other global compliances. Is this company a bit of a renegade, or are you going to have to are you going to have to do massive changes to the go-to-market model to fit things together? So the integration side of it is hard. You've got a big decision over brand. Do you combine? Does one take it? Does one not? Do you create some new brand to combine before? What's the timeline for that brand convergence? Then obviously you've got a people side of things. Does this add people with skills that you don't have currently that helps you and moves you forwards? And the most fundamental question, though, is ideal customer and the overlap. We've already touched on it very briefly, but most acquisitions have some thesis about the fact that there are these two markets that are severely overlapping, and therefore you're able to go and double down on capability and the talent you're building in your company against that ideal customer. And often that's true, but sometimes that's really hard to see from the outside. And it's really hard to see whether, even if it's the same type of companies you're serving, is it the same buying persona? Are they buying for the same reason? And so mapping those things closely, I think, is really, really important.
So we mentioned your keynote at Textilvania. It was really interesting. And you talked there about product-led, sales-led, and marketing-led growth. Can you explain in short what are the differences for those that maybe don't know all of the differences, and maybe what is Paddle doing currently, all of them, or maybe focus on only one of them?
Sure. And people always want to add new ones. I hear community-led growth and founder-led growth, and there's always a new. We're marketers. We always come up with new names, right?
Of course.
So if we take those three: sales-led, marketing-led, and product-led, fundamentally, if you think about the three growth levers: acquisition, monetization, and retention, and you can draw a 9 box there. For each of those, it's a lens of looking at acquisition, monetization, and retention. So product-led growth is looking at acquisition of users, monetization of users, and retention of users through the lens of the product formally. And so you're saying, how can our product attract? How can our product monetize? How can our product keep, retain, and expand our existing customers? Marketing-led, again, the same. We're thinking about those three, but through the lens of marketing. How can marketing help you attract customers, educate them about what they should pay and how they should pay, and how can marketing and communications help keep them? And then sales-led, again, the same as those three, but usually through the person of the sales rep. And so when we look at the data around product-led companies, it's very rare for a product-led business to scale beyond 20, 30 million ARR without adding a sales team.
Why?
Because as you start getting to higher revenue marks, to keep growing at the right rate, to keep growing at a good rate, you need to increase your average order size. And so that usually implies going up the organizational chart, which normally means buyer decisions are made in a group. It means information security and legal and compliance and procurement get involved. And so all of those things you need a salesperson to navigate. And also, you often build out multiple products and you have a multi-product strategy, or you have a more complicated product. And that often can't be just demoed and delivered and then frictionlessly upsold. This unique dream, this imaginary dream we have, that we don't need anyone to talk to anyone. They'll just buy and then upsell forever. So all that being said, at our scale, we're definitely using all three. And we're wanting to make sure that we're optimizing all three. And so if we take them one by one, let's take marketing led first. It's an easy one, right? HubSpot being a great example of this. So we have our content, we have events, we run events all over the world constantly, and we have data. We have a unique data asset, a unique view on the industry that we're constantly using to publish and benchmark. And all three of those attract people into our ecosystem. We're able then, through our communications, to educate them and retain them. So that's marketing led. Then if we go to sales led, it's not rocket science. We've got a sales team. We split the world into Americas and rest of world, and we've got a sales team in each. And we are reaching out to those companies we believe need paddle and can be really successful using paddle, and entering those conversations. We've got to find relevant opportunities to engage those people. But if they're of significant scale and complexity, then that's one of the primary motions that we use. And then we have product led. Product led applies to everyone, but it helps particularly with SMB, where there's no economic justification of hiring sales reps to go and sell into small companies. And this means we have to have very good self-serve onboarding. We have to get people through our risk checks quickly and frictionlessly. We have to make sure we've got a good sandbox and a good production environment for them to go and get live. We have to have very good dev docs, very good API documentation and SDKs. And that's something we've invested a lot in over the last year. If we went back a year and a half, our product-led onboarding, our self-serve, was pretty poor. It was largely designed to keep people out, rather than help them come in, because of needing to make sure that no bad actors entered our ecosystem. And we've put a product team and an engineering team on that over the last 6 months, and they've transformed it, and there's lots more innovation coming. And that's meant that now a significant portion of our new customers come through that channel. So these all play off against each other, right? These aren't three different funnels. Some people come in via self-serve, and then we need to pass them to a sales rep because it's a complicated deal. Some deals are initiated by a sales rep. They've been prospecting into that account for months maybe, and it goes quiet. And then suddenly we see a self-serve sign up, and they never talk to anyone, but they go live. So these things are complicated, but those are examples of how we use all three.
You mentioned bad actors when it comes to product-led growth. How did you change your mindset, not to focus only on bad actors, but also allow people to sign up and use your self-serve?
Yeah. So if we just explain that concept a bit more in our in our example, in our circumstance, it's really important, because we're taking global liability for taxes for all of the companies that we serve, that we understand what they're selling, who they're selling it to, and that those things are above board. Because all of our service partners, the payment rails we're using, etc., they want to know that that's all done correctly. And so we're at risk, and all of the customers are at risk if we don't do that well. So it's a really strong principle in our business. People come and join Paddle because they know we operate well and robustly on that. And so we always want to err on the side of caution there, and making sure that all the companies we're serving are selling what they're saying they're selling to the people that they're saying they're selling it to. So having said that, we got to a point in our growth where we recognized that we had to invest in that to open up another ceiling. We had to open up another motion. And our product team until then, for the previous year, had been devoted to rebuilding our entire platform from the ground up. We went through a full product rebuild last year, about 100 engineers over the course, maybe a bit more than that, 150 engineers over the course of 12, 18 months. And once we'd done that, then we suddenly had the capacity to invest in our self-serve onboarding. So it wasn't that we didn't have the ambition to do it previously, but strategy is about where you play and why you win, and you've got to sequence your investments. And so we chose to sequence a rebuild of our entire platform that's gone really well before we sequenced allowing people into it in a more frictionless way.
As far as the self-serve and like building out the docs and everything else, how did you structure that to make it as frictionless for the teams working on it? You mentioned product, engineers, I'm guessing DevRel as well at some point.
Yep.
How does that look at Paddle?
Yeah, our DevRel team is I think 3 or 4 people at the moment, so it's still quite a small but mighty team. They've done a huge job over the course of the last year to get where we are, and it really is a radical transformation. And I really believe you talk about how do you do it across these different teams. One of the things we've seen at Paddle is an escalation of the importance of alignment. And often as people in smaller businesses, as founders, we discount the value of all company alignment. Because in the early days, alignment's usually a founder just telling everyone what to do.
It's easy.
And you're scrapping. And then suddenly life becomes complicated, right? The world, you're serving different ICPs, you've got different products. And without any bad intent, different teams become misaligned.
Yeah.
And we described it as we had world-class rowers in a rowing boat, but all rowing at slightly different tempos in slightly different directions. And so one of the pieces of work we've been doing internally as a leadership team over the course of the last 18 months is getting all company alignment. And that big process of relaunching our core product, our billing product, was one of the main ways that we did that, was making sure that was a big project that everybody in the company knew about, that everyone was aligned, that we had to go and get delivered, and everyone had to work together on it. And it's been really good to see that alignment muscle building. So cross-functional working is getting much stronger. Cross-functional decision-making is getting much stronger. And that really serves not just Paddle, but all of our customers, because we're able to ship much faster. So it was a great microcosm, a great example of alignment allowing us to move fast.
So you mentioned different customers, different users that a scale-up gets as it grows. But also, like, besides like customers, in terms of using product, scale-ups also get different target groups that are looking at them that you need to address. So analysts, maybe the media, if you're going for an IPO, potential investors.
Yep.
How do you think a marketing leader should look at those audiences, those whatever we want to call them, types of users also as part of like the whole marketing strategy?
Firstly, they're very important and they do change over time. And in each of those different stakeholder bases you described, there'll be misalignment between the different people that comprise it, right? They won't all be thinking the same. So let's take those one by one. I love the process of analyst relations in multiple businesses. I've owned that process working with Forrester and Gartner, etc. The company I founded along with Ed, IDEO, we built a good relationship with Forrester and with Gartner. And then at Episerver and Optimizely, we were in top quadrant in all the major reports. And that was critical to us establishing credibility. But as you well know, it's a process of juggling all of these different analysts with their own views of the future, none of which perfectly overlap probably with what your company vision is. But managing input from them, respectful input, how you can understand what their view of the future is, but also pushing back on what your view is, and most importantly, working over time. You're building those relationships over multiple touch points. And in the early days, many startups just push this to the future because they're too small to build that relationship at any scale, of any level of consistency. But also it costs time. If not, it costs money. So analysts, you've got to dive in. There's lots of good things that have been written about that. And I actually used to teach an analyst relations course in a marketing program in the UK because I felt it was one of those things that no one talked about. Everyone has the accusations of pay to play, but they don't get under the skin of how you can use it effectively as a startup. And I think that relationship building, that hearing, that understanding is critical. If we move on to some of those other stakeholder bases, your partners was one you didn't talk about, but that's another one that becomes really important. That's another thing I'm bullish on as a marketing leader, is making sure we're more integrated into an ecosystem, that we're relating to and working with people who are serving our same ICP. You talked about investors. Again, most businesses, by the time they get to any kind of scale, will have multiple investors with different alignment on timeframes, on outcomes, on what they want, on how they can help. And so managing that is complicated. And then, you also mentioned some other partner types in the mix there, particularly perhaps public market investors when you get very late stage. I think critical to all of this comes back to how you would treat a customer. Like, understand what their intent is, what their aims are, what their challenges are, not just on an organizational level, but on a personal level. And I think if you apply the same marketing principles to those new sets of stakeholders, then you're doing something right to start with. And often the problem is where you forget about them entirely. And so you don't prioritize, or you don't give enough time to understand what their hopes and dreams and aspirations and wants and constraints are, and the time to build that relationship consistently. And I think if you give time for both of those, understanding them up front, and then time over time to give them a relationship of trust, then you're doing something right. But of course, we all have to prioritize. And those stakeholder groups, really, they come to their fore as you really scale later on.
Yeah, it sounds like that adage. I think Paul Graham wrote about this a lot, like doing things that don't scale. In this case with scale-ups, like as you mentioned, like relations with analysts, it's things that you can't really automate.
Nope.
AI won't help you.
Nope.
It's things that you just need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that process of engaging with analysts has also a lot of fear around it from startups, because there's the fear of exclusion. If you're not perhaps seen as one of the top buzzy startups, you can be on the outside of any of one of those reports, and people don't understand the amount of work it takes, the amount of things that don't scale, manual effort, human effort it takes to build those relationships, get to the point. And I think many people I've worked with have not engaged with those stakeholders because they believe it's some kind of fixed system that they can't enter. And really it's not. These are all humans who are operating under their own set of constraints and ambitions, and you've just got to understand that environment, understand their ecosystem, and then work within it. And I think there's massive benefit, particularly on the insight side, because they are speaking with your target customer, if you choose the right analyst, and your competitors on a daily basis. And that's a really unique source of insight, particularly if you're an enterprise software company.
So based on their insights and maybe questions and so on, you can again get something new that you can use in the market.
100%. Most people enter analyst relations wanting to influence.
Yeah.
But really, you should start off by wanting to learn. And that's where I think the best starting point is. Even if everything in you wants to go and pitch and persuade them of your vision and your category and why you should be top right, if you approach it wanting to learn, then I think that's always the good basis.
So I really love your subtle branding on your t-shirt. Well, let's talk about branding, especially for startups and later on scale-ups. I won't say how much do you invest in branding, but I want to ask that. How much do you invest, and why do you think that it's important to invest? Especially you're a B2B business, you don't have to influence the end customer with huge billboards and TV commercials. How do you invest in branding, and why?
Let's start with why first,
Okay.
and then we'll come to how and what. I fully, wholeheartedly believe that if you do not invest in brand, you pay the price in customer acquisition cost every quarter from now until you exit. Every study shows that in segments or clusters or geographies where you have higher brand awareness and higher brand affinity, you will find demand conversions improve. And so for me, there is a logical argument to this before we get to anything that is soft and fluffy and emotional, right?
Yeah.
And it's a CFO level conversation that if you don't invest in brand, you're going to pay the price by having to spend more in your demand process, demand creation, demand conversion. Then the other kind of sub point beneath that is that as you scale, building a brand to demand machine, brand to demand engine is a really effective way of breaking out of the linearity of hiring salespeople. The biggest companies out there, if we think about the ServiceNows and the Salesforce, their brand enters the room way before their sales rep does.
Yeah.
And even they are very sales-led businesses. There is a huge brand halo effect that goes in front. Many people would describe some of the market segment sales reps in those businesses as order takers, because the selling job was already done by the brand. All they've got to do is show up and make sure there's a correct price and a correct service offering, and then the sale is done. And so it becomes incredibly powerful as you get to scale. Now, in terms of how we do it, there's a few things. Firstly, we have a mantra internally that we want to be the most helpful brand in SaaS. And I really believe that helpfulness is a great path to a strong brand. And so we are constantly jumping on calls. We are constantly helping out prospects. We are constantly helping customers. Even if people are never in the market for us, we want to find a way to be helpful because we believe that pays over time. And so that's a core tenet of everything we do. Is a core tenet of how our salespeople show up, how our service people show up, how our support people show up, how our marketers, engineers, product people show up. That aspect of people often is overlooked, right? Because people want to think about the billboard or the logo and all the rest of it. But for me, that's really important, how our people show up. And I get regularly I get feedback on, I met someone from Paddle and they rocked. I met someone from Paddle and they were super helpful. Met someone from Paddle and they went above and beyond. And I love that because that shows we're living our brand promise. So people. Then let's think about the product. If you have a great brand, but you're devoid of a strong product offering that gives value to people, then there's no point. You've got a big disconnect between what people might perceive initially and what they receive. And so, a lot of our investments in brand are actually investments in product and engineering, because if we can build a quality product that's delivering the value we need to, a brand is built off the back of that. Dave Kellogg, a fantastic CMO. I love his view on brand, which is you build brand by selling 1 and then selling 2 and then selling 3 and then selling 10. And that's how you build a B2B brand. Now, I know it's more than that, and I believe it's more than that, but that is a strong way of building a brand. So people, our technology, those are 2 key ways. But then one more thing. I really think it's important to not fall into this false dichotomy of brand versus demand. And as marketers, we want to say, what is our brand spend and what is our demand spend? What's building conversion and what's building awareness? And I don't believe that false dichotomy. I don't believe that's how the world works. I think in every marketing interaction, in every customer interaction, you've got a responsibility as a marketer to change hearts and minds, brand, and change action, demand. And if we hold ourselves to account to make sure every interaction is quality, is helpful, then we can do both at the same time. And I think often in the conversation we miss that the responsibility is ours to do both at the same time. Is every SDR outbound call script building brand at the same time as demand? Or is it just annoying people? Is every event you run actually serving people because they're going to remember what's going on? They're going to walk away with not just a bit of swag or a pen with your logo on it and a nice full tummy, but they're going to walk away with memories and connections and relationships and mentors. Because if they are, you're building brand. And so thinking a bit harder about every interaction, I think, is a key way of making sure you can instill part of your brand in that experience.
Why do you think that then it's so hard for companies to do that switch, especially as they scale, where they might be founder-led at first, sales-led, and then at some point they need to build out the marketing team, they need to invest in brand, etc. But it's always, from at least the conversations we've had with founders, it's always the same thing. It's, we want to invest in brand, etc.
But they don't do it.
It's that costs how much? And what's the number of customers we're going to get from that event, content, etc.
Yep.
How to have that conversation? How should founders or marketeers even think of it? Because there's a lot of situations where the first or second marketeer is becoming the marketing leader, and they need to get their CEO, CFO on board on, look, we need to invest in this because
well, he explained it in the beginning. He said why. Cost of acquisition will be much bigger if we do not invest in brand. But maybe you can share some more details or arguments.
Or tactics. Is it just having another type of conversation then?
I think you do have to change the conversation. I think also we collectively, SaaS leaders, have trained CFOs and board members poorly because we've shown Marketo reports and Eloqua reports that show these cost per leads and this nonsense. And we talk about blended CAC where everything's in the mix of there rather than talking about the benefit of this channel. Like, all of us can look at our marketing processes and we will see inbound leads who are highly motivated, have already done research and come in and close fast. And then we will see people perhaps who we are advertising to or doing some outbound to that have got no previous experience with our company, and they take much longer. Sometimes they don't close at all, or if they do, it's a lot more expensive to close them. And yet we lump all of those together and talk about customer acquisition cost. And that's one of the problems. We've trained our boards and we've trained our CFOs to think of this as some amorphous blob rather than separating out what really drives high conversion, what really drives speed versus what doesn't. And often it's awareness, it's brand, it's people understanding what you do before they ever interact with you that enables speed. And so I think that's one thing that's really important, is to change that conversation. But I spoke just a minute ago about making sure every interaction had bits of brand and demand. So another way of thinking about that is the demand spend you've got, how can we make sure that's acting also as brand spend? And I could use multiple examples from Paddle, but if we just let's take that documentary we filmed when we acquired ProfitWell. Now that feels very brandy, right?
Very fluffy,
very
fluffy.
That's
very
so cute,
fluffy.
right?
Yeah.
Why would anyone spend money on that? Right?
Totally. Why would anyone spend money? two things that are really important about that. Firstly, any ROI, if you reduce the I, then the R doesn't really matter so much. It's only when the I is very big that people care a lot about the R. So that was done very cheaply. It wasn't an expensive production. It's a very quality production. One of my good friends is the exec producer on that. He's an award-winning independent documentary filmmaker. It's a superb bit of content, but it didn't cost us a huge amount. I bet we spent less on that than many have on an ebook. Okay,
Okay.
so reduce the pressure by bringing the I down and making sure you're testing, you're experimenting, you're finding cheap ways. And then secondly, that showed up, and I can't remember the exact stats. We use Gong as our core recording software. That showed up, I think, in 50 or 60 sales conversations in the 3 months afterwards. We used it at many events at SaaSdoc and SaaSda. We showed a screening. We showed a screening in our Boston office, our London office, invited our customers and our prospects. And if we go back to why we did that, I mean, there's a bunch of reasons why, but the customer reason why is that the market we serve, software founders, they either want to buy other businesses or be bought. And so acquisitions are they're a point of interest, and they're an under-discussed point of interest. And we had a unique right to speak about it in a creative way, as a company that was ambitious, acquiring another business was ambitious, both with strong media plays, the ability to get the cameras in the room, and the willingness of everyone involved to do it. And so all of that built up to that being a unique asset we could deliver that has really done both. It's done brand, it's helped our image, it's helped our recognition, it's helped awareness, but it's also helped demand. And I can speak about multiple other campaigns similar where we've invested in something that feels fluffy, but actually it's got a very strong demand proposition underneath it.
So besides the documentary, obviously with ProfitWell, you now have a lot of production of content, a lot of videos, podcasts, content of all shapes and sizes, as you said, helping the SaaS community. How do you think about using content in that strategic way where, I mean, a lot of companies try to be helpful. They might have a blog, they might have some content, but in the end, podcast maybe, yeah. But they might not, I'm not sure if it's doubling down on it or something. How do you think you can really use that content to maybe not 10x, but really grow again your user base? How do you think about it? I'll plan it out.
I don't think many companies do want to be helpful through their content. I think many of them is very self-serving. It's yet another comparison blog post. It's yet another pain points we serve. And I think mediocrity is really competitive. And so people who are investing in something that's a bit different, a bit compelling, is going to, actually meet the emotional as well as the rational needs of the person you're trying to meet. You actually do some proper research behind it. All of those things, I think, help you rise above the great swathe of content that's being created. So I think that's important to note. There is an opportunity to go bigger and go harder than many people are. In terms of, a few of our theses behind it, our thinking behind it, firstly, we really believe in episodic content. And that was, a key belief of ProfitWell. It's a key belief of ours. And we've tried to continue investing in content that is episodic. Rather than random acts of content, yet another thing, whether it's an ebook or a YouTube video, trying to make sure there are multiple drops on the same theme. If that theme is something that connects your customer and your value proposition together in some way, then what you're able to do there is reaffirm your right to speak on that topic and build an audience, a subscribed audience around that topic. So episodic, I think, is really important. Secondly, video. A lot of it's video. It's not just video, but we do invest a lot in video. And I believe video is one of the most compelling formats we have. And I think particularly with the application of AI onto that too, where we can go multilingual quite fast. And I'm looking forward to some innovations on that front over the next few months at Paddle. I think it's a way you can communicate a huge amount of information, but also a feeling, a tone in a very deep way with people you never meet face to face. And we serve a global audience. Many of them we will never meet. And so being able to do that in a very rich way through video is important. So those two things that are important. Then thirdly, I already talked about research, actually going deeper. And, I think there's lots of ways that we can build content. We can, talk to our internal subject matter experts. We can speak to external people who might have some way to talk on the issues we're facing. But one of the things that I find most people creating content are under investing in is research into the content, into the topics they're actually going and creating. We all have ChatGPT and YouTube a finger click away from going and finding everything we know and want to know. And so actually going a few clicks deeper and making sure we properly research what we're putting out there, we find the most interesting person, we find an angle, we combine themes together. It's the art of storytelling. I think if we put that extra bit of thought and research into it, then it's another way we can cut through this morass of content that's just another 500 words about a comparison versus a competitor. So those are a few of the theses behind it. And we're innovating. We'll get some of it wrong. This is stuff that we've got videos out there that we've put a lot of time and effort into, and no one cares.
Yeah.
And we've got to learn from that. And so this isn't always going to be a hit machine. This is about making sure we're constantly experimenting. And it's also an interesting way, particularly short form video, of finding the topics that are connecting people's interests.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's on Shorts, whether it's Insta, TikTok, etc. The ability to create a very short form video that has some inbuilt distribution, I think, is super interesting for finding new bits of market attention.
So you mentioned AI when it comes to content creation, for example, for localization of the content, because creating content costs money, even though you have a friend that can help you with videos, award-winning friend. But you probably heard that Klarna tried to start a conversation about savings that AI can bring us, with content creation, and they calculated that they will save $10 million in 1 year when it comes to creating photos, images. So that's a huge amount of money. And the CEO and the CMO started the conversation, and it got a bit of a backslash on social media. Mm-hmm. There were some deleted posts on Twitter, X. So what do you think about that conversation? On one side, we can create content more efficiently, and that costs much more money than it used to. But on the other side, as a marketeer, how do you look at the impact of AI on human talent in marketing?
So I already mentioned that I feel mediocrity is very competitive, and nothing is more true than in this space, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're seeing the death of the mediocre marketer. And I don't mean that from a physical perspective, but you've got to find ways of becoming specialist, finding points of creativity, points of unique personal relationship that enable you to do more. And you've got to learn all of those tools. I think the lucky marketers are those who are entering the market right now and have the opportunity to be native in all of these different tools. That's a really interesting leg up into an industry when you're able to come in and have these superpowers that you can use. So I think that's important to note to start with. And there are all kinds of concerns that we need to think about here, from the copyright issue to legal issues to a whole range of other things. Not least, the creative process that becomes completely mundane if we all just throw out AI generated content. But on the Klarna issue and the way they approached it, this phrase "do more with less" is what many people use, and I'm much more focused on the do more than the with less. That's our approach at Paddle. I think we can do loads more using these tools. I'm much less interested in that making sure we can be efficient by doing it with less people. And so my challenge to my team is try these tools, keep innovating. I find it fascinating that non-technical marketers can now be pretty technical.
Yeah.
They can build their own scripts, and they can build their own little apps and their own little tools. And that's a massive time saver. So how can we do more? What's the more we can do? What are the opportunities that we can now unlock that we could never unlock previously? And over the next few months, you'll see a few examples of that from our team, where there are new automations, new things that we have built that help you operate and grow your company that were never possible beforehand. And that's the area that I'm really excited about.
You probably already communicate with your users via email, like Paddle. But do you use SMS, Apple Messages, or WhatsApp? If not, you should check out our InfoWeave messaging platform, built for scale-ups just like yours. Companies like Uber, HubSpot, and Meta use it for all their users. More info in the link in the description below.
And to end, what are some other things that you might be excited about in terms of like how your team can scale their expertise, like their skills maybe, or what would you suggest to marketing leaders at scale-ups that they should be focusing on in order to take advantage of the market opportunities, the new technologies like AI and so on?
I don't remember that much from my university degree, But the one lecture that will always stay with me was in my first year, and it was a lecture on the art of learning how you learn. I think it's a really critical piece of maturing in any profession is understanding how we learn. It's the greatest meta skill. It's the skill by which you learn all other skills. And we all learn differently. Some of us learn by doing, by experimentation. Some of us learn by reading, by rote, from memory. Other people, maybe you learn by actually watching someone do it on YouTube and then taking it back home. And so what I try and do with my team is encouraging them to learn how they learn, first of all, and then invest in that process. Because I think if we apply a cookie cutter approach here, everyone needs to do this course, or everyone needs to try building an app, or everyone needs to go and read this blog post, we're missing out on some of the, the variety of life. And so learning how each of us individually learn is really, really critical. And then we can invest. So, if I talk really personally for myself, I love speaking with people who are outside of Paddle's context. They're not customers, they're not partners. They might be in the software space or they might not be, but they're outside of our environment. And I love the process of learning patterns, models, frameworks that are not directly applicable to what we're doing, and then finding those points of innovation or those points where we can use those models in our process. And I like doing that face-to-face, or I like doing that on calls. I like that back and forth, that verbal processing. That's how I learn. It's one of the ways I learn. Now, if I was sitting reading every newsletter under the sun as my method of learning, then I wouldn't be learning anywhere near as much. And so for me, that's often how I do it. I also read, and I read books, and I listen to podcasts, etc. But those conversations with other marketing leaders, with other business leaders outside of our initial kind of touch points is one of the best ways I learn. So I encourage my team to find the way they learn best.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew, for being part of the podcast.
Thank you.
My absolute pleasure.
Thanks for watching this interview with Andrew. Now watch this interview with the founder of Netlify, which powers more than 35 million websites.